George Soros is the world's most famous investor and speculator. It was his fund that earned in excess of $1 billion when he bet against the British pound in 1992. But he is more than just a money manager with one of the best track records in history. He is also a noted philanthropist whose gifts include a fund to prevent Russian nuclear scientists from selling their knowledge to a donation to help the children of war-torn Bosnia. Through his Open Society Fund, he has set up foundations throughout Eastern Europe with the hope of assisting those countries towards more free and democratic societies. It is a pleasure to have him back at this table for more conversation because there's a new book called Soros on Soros, Staying Ahead of the Curve, which is a reflection of his philosophy about business, his philosophy about philanthropy, and his philosophy about an open society on the basis of some interviews done with him by Byron Wayne of Morgan Stanley. Welcome back. Let me first talk about the Eastern Europe.
Sure.
Give me your report card on what you think both your own foundations have been able to accomplish and how the political and economic situation is there in terms of Poland and Hungary and Czechoslovakia.
Well, it's very mixed. I think that a great opportunity to move that whole region towards what I call open societies has been missed. And there's now, in many places, a tendency to develop some new form of totalitarian regimes. Well, totalitarian is too strong a word, but authoritarian regimes based on nationalist ideology in combination with newly emerging business interests. And that is the sort of classic recipe for fascism. Now, you know, I don't want to overstate the case because there are many countries like exactly Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic,
right,
that are sort of really moving towards Europe. But the case in Russia, of course, is up for grabs. It's very much a struggle which way it's going to go. But there are other countries, like for instance...
Between democratic forces and how would you characterize the alternative?
Well, it's sort of a new authoritarian regime based on nationalism.
Right.
This is the...
Zhirinovsky and others who think
right,
like he does.
Zhirinovsky is fading,
right,
but maybe Levitt is rising.
Right.
But whoever wants to win the elections will have to take a somewhat xenophobic, anti-Western point of view, because people have been very disappointed by the changes which have occurred.
Well, in fact, Bill Safar in a column today in the New York Times pointed out that Boris Yeltsin, in order to win re-election, may become very strongly anti-Western, both the convention, both NATO as well as the conventional arms agreement.
When Yeltsin went to Poland the first time, he quite agreed to Poland joining NATO, and then his advisor said, no, you can't let that go. And of course, the objections on Bosnia are very largely, playing to the domestic audience,
to the ethnic community who's a domestic force in Russian politics.
Although, frankly, people in Russia don't give a damn about Bosnia. I mean, this is just grandstanding. It's not a real issue in Russia. They care about Chechnya. People deeply care about what happened in Chechnya. Bosnia is not an issue that is discussed outside Parliament.
And they care about Chechnya to the detriment of Boris Yeltsin and blame him for what happened.
People are very upset about that horrible incident. Yes.
But does he win re-election, you think?
Well, it's too early to say. First, you've got the parliamentary elections, and there is a hope of sort of a democratic center with this Chernomyrdin party, and Yavlinsky is doing well in the polls. But I'm afraid that the anti-reform elements may predominate.
Yavlinsky is someone you admire very much for his economic ideas. Well,
altogether, I have great respect for him because he's one man who actually stands by his ideas. He's really remained, let's say, clean in a society where very few people have been able to.
If someone came to you and said, have your foundation investments, the amount of money that you have through foundation, creating the university, Central European University,
yes.
creating the university, and other things you have done to promote the notion of an open society. Have those seeds been worth the effort?
Yes.
Would you say yes, or would you say...
No question about it. I mean, I think that when you look at the entirety of what the foundations have done, it's been very worthwhile and very effective. Yet if you look at individual programs, many have failed. We have had many difficulties. In Russia, we have had about 3 putsches where the foundation had to be cleaned up. So it's been one long struggle with lots of difficulties, but when you look at the results, very rewarding.
Philanthropy for you is more rewarding than anything you do?
Well, I've got great reservations about philanthropy. Actually, I really think that charity is a very corrupting activity, and it is so, even in my own foundations, and I'm struggling against it all the time.
Where does the corruption come from?
Well, first of all, you know, you corrupt the people that you give money to. Because you don't teach them self-reliance, but you teach them to depend on you.
You teach them dependence rather than interdependence.
That's right. So you make them, they become objects of charity,
yes.
Which, I mean, we avoid. But then it's very corrupting to the giver, because people suck up to him. People will tell him what people, when they go to a foundation, they tell the foundation what the foundation wants to hear. And then when they get the money, they do with it what they want to do. And the two are not the same.
Does it cause you to want to pull back from philanthropy because you believe that it might not be?
No, but I must say that I got sucked into something that I knew was full of paradoxes and contradictions.
Did you do it in the beginning because you had made so much money that you wanted to carry forward a philosophy you believed in?
Well, it had to do with that, in the sense that when I made more money than what I needed for my own good, I thought, how can I serve the public good? But until quite recently, the foundations have not been driven by money. In other words, it wasn't that we had to give away a certain amount of money. Unfortunately, it hadn't also been that we didn't have money to give in case there was a good cause. So it was really the merit of the particular project that mattered.
Let me talk about the business end and come back to the philosophical end for a second. There has been much talk about your comeback. During the bad times of certainly the beginning of '95, I guess, when did the comeback begin, when you began to once again connect?
Well, no, I don't. No, I think this shouldn't be taken out of context. We have had, several patches. We have an average performance of something like 35%
over the last
20 odd years, 26 years. But it's made up of years which are 5% or 8%, and years that are 60% or 100%. That's how you get the average.
Yeah.
And we had 4 wonderful years, 90 to 93 inclusive. Right. And 94, we were only up 4%, which was our second worst year. And in the first half of this year, we were actually down when the market was up.
That's what I referred to.
And that was a sort of a bad patch.
But you have said, you're quoted as saying that somehow you began to feel somewhat that the forces were against you, in a sense. I mean, did you...
Well, we just didn't get it right. We had the opportunities were there, and we got caught. And it didn't hang together, but we got it together now.
All right, but stay with me, though. Let me explore this, because there is something, I think, for people to say, what happened when you were on such a roll that you began to hit the rough patch? Right. What did it do to you, and what did it cause you to question, and how did you come out of it?
Well, first of all, I'm immune, because I've now got a young team.
I know.
They do all the work, and I'm very supportive, and I worry for them, but I don't really worry.
Well, Stanley Druckenmiller and people like that have gotten all the credit.
But they took all the pain, right. Because managing money the way we do is extremely painful. a very responsible job and very stressful. And I don't actually feel the stress. If I did, I probably wouldn't be able to sit here and talk to you. So that's number one.
You don't feel the stress anymore because it's not your judgments that are on the line?
I'm not on the line. Right. They are on the line, and I'm just stand behind them. I'm coach,
right,
and they are performing. It's
right.
you know.
You're the coach and Stanley's the quarterback,
yeah,
is that?
Right. So of course I'm involved, and you know, you constantly re-examine what you're doing wrong, and you slowly you tentatively get things right. But you can't really get the dynamic going until you have a little profit under your belt, because it's very different when you're risking your principal than when you're risking your profit. So that's how you get these runs, when you get it right, and then you can risk more and make more money. When you have lost it, when you are doing poorly, you've got to retrench. And even as you get it right, you don't get the performance until you can do it on a larger scale, because risking your profit, you see, is much easier.
It's less terrifying than risking your principal.
Yeah, I mean, the reason we have such a good record is because we never lose our principal. Once we are in a bad position, we retrench. So we might lose a little bit, but we'll never endanger
because you leverage well.
That's right. We deleverage when we are not making money.
You stop leveraging. I assume that's what deleveraging means.
Yeah.
But in the Sterling coup, which would not coup, in the investment there, where you captured the attention of the world and certainly the Bank of England,
right?
Did you put $10 billion at risk or not?
Yes.
Now, was that all profit or was that principal?
Well, it was our principal, but it was not all at risk, because the most we could have lost would have been, let's say, 2-3%, because there was no. It was a high reward, low risk bet.
Right.
In other words, if it had gone wrong, we would have had the transaction cost of undoing it. Right. Whereas if we got it right, we made something like 15-20%. So we did put all our equity at risk, but it wasn't, it wasn't really very much of an expert.
You weren't risking $10 billion, you were risking $1 billion or
less, even less.
Even less.
That was substantially less.
Yeah.
We made $1 billion, but we made more than $1 billion actually. But we could have lost a few $100 million, which would have been perfectly acceptable.
1995. I want to move past business, but stay with me for a second. In 1995, the beginning of '95, when you began to, it was a rough patch. Did you change your ideas about macro investing and looking at everything at that time? Did you call into question any part of your philosophy about investing or your practices over the previous 25 years?
Not the philosophy, not the approach, but every one of our position was very much re-examined. Yeah. And actually one of the things we did was to focus more on individual stocks, and not just the macro, because the macro is one bet. You see, whereas if you select particular stocks, you have a thesis concerning an industry or a company, then you have, let's say, a division of risk, so you can do a little more.
Yeah. When your philosophy about equity investments when looking at a company has to do with management, has to do with.
Right now it does, because this is an era of high capitalism, if you like, where the interests of the shareholders rule supreme, and managements pay a lot of attention to the interests of the shareholders. And if you can
and that's a change you find, that there's much more of a sensitivity to shareholders and return to shareholders than been in the past.
That is correct. And therefore, if you can identify managements which are changing their attitude, or where there's a change of management, you can be very well rewarded.
Yeah. You say this is a golden age of capitalism. It continues.
Yes.
What is it about where we are economically in the world, looking at it globally, that makes you optimistic about capitalism?
Well, don't
put words in your mouth.
No, please don't, because I'm not so optimistic. In fact, I'm pretty sure that this golden age is not going to last forever, because it's built on false foundations. We have had a similar period, let's say, at the end of the last century, and it didn't last. You had global markets. Money didn't move as fast as it's moving now, but it moved just as much. It was very similar to what we have today. In fact, it was more stable than what we have today because, first of all, you had the gold standard as opposed to the fluctuating currency system, which is much more unstable that we have now. And secondly, you had an imperial power, England, that was the main beneficiary of this global trading system, you know, the City of London. Yes. And they were perfectly willing to send a gunboat or two to faraway places in order to, you know, put down the native, keep the natives in place.
To maintain the empire.
That's right. We don't have that now because the United States is the sole remaining superpower, but is not the main beneficiary of this global trading system. And therefore, you know, we can't be the policeman of the world. We can't afford it. We don't want to be. And therefore, there is no policeman. And there is no imperial power. There is no balance of powers as you had during the Cold War, when you had these two superpowers sort of keeping each other in check. So you have a vacuum, a power vacuum. You have instability. And this is actually one of the main points I make in the book. This cannot last like this. We actually need an international security system. And the trouble is that the United Nations has failed just at a time when it would be most needed.
Bosnia being one perfect example.
Bosnia has been to the United Nations as Abyssinia was to the League of Nations in 1935. It showed that the League of Nations doesn't work.
Proved its impotency.
That's right. And this is an issue for us, particularly for the United States, because we created the United Nations. It's our design. We are the leading power. But we say the United Nations failed. They failed. Yeah. It's us that have decided not to.
For a number of reasons, including the fact that the rest of the world, and certainly the Western world, Japan and Europe, Bosnia being one small example, is looking to us for leadership.
Yes.
Is that just a failure of this administration or a failure of a mindset in America about our role in the world?
I think it's a bipartisan issue.
Right.
I think that the Republicans have to make up their minds whether they want to support the United Nations or not. I think that, and if they don't, you know, what role are we going to play in the world?
Stay with me on that. In terms of Bosnia and what the Clinton administration has done, are you supportive because of your concern for what's happened to the children of Sarajevo?
Look, I think that we did finally. You see, when actually the survival of NATO became an issue, because NATO got involved and it lost its credibility. And for us, maintaining the credibility of NATO is what really moved us. And also to help Clinton in his re-election campaign.
To appear to be strong in foreign policy.
Yeah, because there was a great weakness there, so he had to do something. Well, it just, you know, once we took action, it seems to have an effect. I mean, it has moved the situation dramatically. Now, unfortunately, it happened too late. And while it is beneficial in the sense of bringing the end much closer, the damage that has been done, it cannot be undone. And we must really recognize this as a terrible failure and learn from it, because basically what we have done has been to allow the ethnic principle, the principle of ethnic cleansing, to prevail. And, you know...
Whether it's practiced by the Serbs or the Croatians or...
Well, actually, the real victor in this situation is Croatia, which has become a nation state with less than 2% Serb population, and there's been 180,000 Serbs that have been expelled from Croatia. Now...
with little opprobrium from the world.
Yes, and I think that that is an issue. I think that it cannot be undone now. I think it's a fact. But what kind of Croatia you're going to have is very important, and this is what we have to pay attention to.
But let me come back to the United States and what we might do. The United States, you think, began to say we have to do something different in order to rescue NATO,
Right.
which was clearly ineffectual and being called into question. And we're
Yes.
now talking about
Yes.
NATO expansion.
Yes.
What can be done now, in a sense, not with respect to Bosnia, but about the future of NATO? What has to happen, and has the United States, by these actions, in a sense, recreated
Well, it has saved
a military arrangement that has no mission like it had in the Cold War?
You're putting your finger on it, because I think it has saved NATO, but the mission of NATO, what is it supposed to do, remains unclear. Is it directed at Russia? That means we want to turn Russia into an enemy.
Right.
I think that the mission of NATO has to be redefined.
And what might it be?
I think that that they ought to stand to protect open societies, basically, we ought to generally, in this part of the world particularly, care about what kind of regime prevails in a country. In other words, our attitude to Russia should be different depending what kind of regime it is. Is it a democratic regime, or is it an authoritarian regime? It's not, Russia in this geopolitical chess board, that...
Well, but let me take that along.
Yeah,
So let's assume it shifts to a totalitarian regime.
Right.
And moves away from any kind of democratic regime.
Right.
How should our posture towards that regime be different?
Well, I think that our posture should be different before it shifts there. In other words,
in order to promote one area or the other, one direction or the other.
That's right. I mean, we had an incredible opportunity to help that part of the world to move towards democracy. That opportunity is now greatly restricted, because we are 5-6 years into the revolution. So again, you can't go back in time. But still, we could learn from the mistakes we made in the last 5 years and still work towards strengthening democracy in that part of the world.
Was it difficult for you, because of your own experience in that area, to, over that period of years from the fall of communism and the fall of the wall and the decline of those regimes, to sit back and see opportunity and not watch, because I don't think the administrations, whether it was Bush or Clinton, seemed to know exactly what to do, and secondly, to know that they had the will of the people to do it in terms of investment?
Well, you see, I didn't sit. I actually threw everything I had into it, and I'm very satisfied having done it. I would have liked to influence policy, and I tried. I tried to get to Bush before he met Gorbachev in Malta, which I thought was the last time, really, to change the direction from the outside. I was unable to do that. So I think that I've succeeded in everything, not everything, but in most of the things that I could do on my own. And I failed in influencing the policy.
But today, Strobe Talbot is the Deputy Secretary of State, is the principal architect of our policy towards Russia. Yes?
Yes.
He listens to you.
He does.
So you have influence on the part of the principal policymaker, not only towards Russia, but towards Eastern Europe.
Yes.
Right?
No, I do now have access. No question. We actually work together. The country where I'm most engaged, and we are really working together, is Ukraine.
Yes.
Because there was a chance to change the direction. The country was sinking, it was disintegrating, it was failing. And a new president was elected, and for the first time, the West, under American leadership, had the wisdom to say, we will invest $4 billion if there is a reform program. So that, and now Ukraine has changed. Now, it's early days, it's very tough. I'm very engaged on working on it, and we have good working relations with the American government, with the international institutions. And I'm hopeful, finally, in this one case, we are doing the right thing as much as one can from the outside.
When asked, is your opinion also that we ought to push forward with NATO expansion regardless of what the Russian government says?
I think I think that the issue is, the question is raised the wrong way. Let Europe admit Poland and Hungary to the European Union. Security will take care of itself. let us have a constructive policy towards Russia, and Russia will not object.
So your
to
idea
those
is forget NATO, let them come into some other kind of economic arrangement or
That's right.
security arrangement
That's right.
rather than NATO, because it is NATO that inflames the Russians or causes at least their paranoia.
There's a saying that war is an extension of politics.
Right.
I say let's concentrate on politics and not war. I mean, it's a failure of politics when we come to war. So let's deal with the political and economic situation in those countries.
That puts you at odds, I think, with Henry Kissinger, who is one of the people who endorse your book.
We could have a very good debate because we do have a difference of opinion.
All right. Let me come back to the world economic situation. You believe that you're bearish on the economic future of France and Germany.
Well,
bearish.
No, I'm concerned. I'm concerned about the trend towards European disintegration.
Yeah.
That is to say, you have a disequilibrium situation after the reunification of Germany. And first there was an attempt to accelerate the integration. It peaked in the Maastricht Treaty. It failed in the process of ratifying that treaty, and now we are in a period of disintegration, and that I think is very harmful because it puts us right back where we were in the interwar period. Nation states with different interests clashing.
You mean between World War I and World War II?
Yes.
Right.
And so this is now disturbing. Yeah. Disintegration of the European Union.
But you have said you're bearish on the economies of France and Germany. Well, I read that over the weekend in the Washington Post.
No, I'm bearish on the French stock market because Germany has a set very stringent conditions
on budget reductions.
Insisted that France has to meet the criteria of the Maastricht Treaty in order to have a common currency. France is lagging, and there's now a confrontation shaping up between the independent central bank in France and the government. And I think that there's going to be a government crisis, and I don't think that Juppé might not survive.
What do you think of Chirac so far?
I admired his stand on Bosnia.
Yes.
I think he showed some leadership. It's a new.
And how about nuclear testing?
That I think was. I think a mistake. Yeah. I think it should have been avoided.
I'm told he had some influence on Clinton's thinking about Bosnia.
I think that it was one of the elements that moved this administration to action.
Okay, I'm coming to the U.S. economy in a second. Let's go to Japan.
Yeah.
You believe that they have dealt with their interest rate problems there, but have not dealt with a significant structural issue they have there, which is that the finance minister has enormous control.
Right. No, you see, Japan faces a problem of deflation,
right,
the likes of which we have not seen since the Depression. It's due to, prices are falling and economic activity is falling. It was a very disturbing development. The banking system is in deep trouble, a lot of bad loans. The government has taken steps to try to dig itself out of this hole. One of the ways of doing it is actually to try to get the yen down in value. This gives a little opportunity to people like me to make some money and dig ourselves out of the hole.
Yeah, I know. You've lost some money on the yen, did you not?
That's right. So interest
some money
rates,
is putting it lightly, probably.
Interest rates have been reduced practically to zero, 0.5%.
Right.
And finally, the yen is falling in value, and there's the problem of Keynes mentioned this problem of pushing on a string, but there are these holes in the banking system, so you can push a lot of string into those holes, so you will be able to do something. So I think that Japan will probably dig itself out, but it hasn't even started to deal with the structural issue which has gotten it into the hole. Because what people don't realize, we sort of so admire this fabulous industrial
economic
machine.
miracle that's taken place there.
The industrial machine, where Japan really has comparative advantage in practically every industry that it enters.
Because they were modernized after the war and they had appropriate management.
Yeah, I think it's a lot. It has a lot to do with mentality.
Right, that's what I want to say.
Really sort of a work ethic, and in a way, sort of a feudal mentality, which is good for producing, but not very good for trading, not very good for playing financial markets. For that, you need a different mentality, a commercial mentality, and that they don't have. And because of that, they have this financial machine, which is under the control of the Ministry of Finance. It's run by bureaucrats and operated by bureaucrats, and they have actually frittered away practically all the wealth.
Oh, the profits of the industrial miracle.
That's right. So there's this tremendous failure next to the tremendous success. We've been mesmerized by the success. We haven't paid attention to the failure.
How about China? What's your feeling about China and all the talk about the potential of China, both as a market because of 1 billion plus people?
Well, I have a little theory about China, and that is that the communist regime will be swept out of power by an old-fashioned capitalist bust.
What do you mean?
Well, because basically the regime has lost the mandate of heaven, so as they call it, namely the trust of the people, and is now tolerated because it delivers economic advance. Right. And it does it
because it's opened itself up to capitalist.
Yeah, it attracts foreign investment,
right.
which is the engine driving the. And if ever that engine goes into reverse, then you're going to have political trouble, which will push the foreign investors further into reverse, which will then create further political problems. So you could have a political and economic collapse together.
Well, might it happen when Deng Xiaoping dies, after all, when he dies, because of the competition among...
I think
he's essentially dead. Yeah.
I think he's dead. So I think that...
I don't want to say that essentially dead. I mean, clearly...
No, I mean, it's to all intents and purposes. So I don't know how. I'm not sufficiently close to it to be able to have a more concrete sense of it.
But that's an interesting idea, that because that if the economic force brought by capitalism should falter,
that's right,
then it's the only thing that's propping up this regime, because they have no political viability. They would say, I suspect, yeah, we do. We have an army, and that's how we maintain our power, and that's how we stay in power.
That is true. That is true.
So we don't need any other kind of power.
Yes, but I think that
power, as Mao Zedong said, power comes at the end of a gun barrel.
That may be true, but that is irreconcilable with economic progress, because the army is a drain on the economy, and actually it is in China, I think, quite a severe drain.
Also, I mean, the notion is, I mean, someone said to me the other day, the reason that they want to sell, although they've canceled the contract of selling to the Iranians, was because so many of the people there's so much corruption at the upper levels who are taking advantage of those economic profits.
Well,
and that corruption might become exposed.
The second generation of
the sons
are the new entrepreneurs.
Yeah,
of course, it's the same in Russia.
The United States. You think we have successfully managed a soft landing?
That's right.
I think
that our economy is in very good shape.
Inflation is under control?
Inflation is under control. The economy is not going into any kind of a recession. It's not overheating. There's a lot of increase in productivity. I think that this whole technological revolution, the information revolution, incidentally, it means that our cost of living index is out of whack. We have been overstating cost of living, and if we reduce it, that would relieve the budget of the COLA, you know, and that
cost
I think,
of living adjustment.
Yes,
right.
and that I think has great, very bullish implications for the market.
Now, until I read you had said that, I had no idea about this notion that inflation is 1% less.
Yes.
You know, is this widely discussed or thought about, or is this simply an argument that you have?
No. It has been a commission, and it's very much in the works. It's a question whether it is really as much as 1% or not.
But you have said it'll save us $160 billion.
That's right.
You know.
That's right. Yes.
And
that's not somehow it's not in the market yet.
Yeah. Why isn't this a ringing endorsement of President Clinton?
Actually, it is. I mean, if that's the issue, it is done well for the economy. It ought to work for him in the elections. I think he has a reasonable chance of getting re-elected, actually.
Yeah, I do too.
Even though I am extremely critical on his failure on the foreign policy
But do you
side.
believe he's coming around, though? I mean, he's had recent foreign policy successes. I mean, people will look at Haiti, they will look at Ireland, which is not entirely his, but he played a role in that. You've got the Middle East, where there's an additional now, phase 2 on the West Bank. I mean, there are a number of things that people are saying, while you don't win elections on foreign policy, what you do is erase notions that you don't know what you're doing.
That's probably right. That's probably right. I find it rather hard to take that that's the only motivation that seems to be driving the administration, because I think that we have greater responsibilities in the world.
Are you supporting him or not?
I supported him last time, but I can't at this point. I can't because of our foreign policy failure. But I may revise my view. I haven't decided how.
You don't have a candidate then?
No, I don't have a candidate, and I don't intend to mix in domestic politics. I think that I do have a foreign policy agenda, but it's really a bipartisan agenda, and I don't think I can advance it by sort of taking sides.
Let me talk about you and your biography, which we have talked about before on this program. Born in Hungary. When you were 14 years old, your father taught you, you say, in a masterful way, the art of survival.
Yeah.
What did you mean?
Well, because, this was the German occupation. We would have been taken away and killed. And he had enough sense, because of his previous experiences, to realize that the normal
What do you mean
rules,
his previous experience?
Well, he was a prisoner of war in Russia,
right.
And he escaped, and he lived through the Russian Revolution, and he came back from that a changed man, because he saw this turmoil, fighting, and I mean he went through a horrendous experience, and that taught him a lesson which then came in very useful. He in turn taught me a lesson which came in useful to me.
Which is the art of survival, which is...
Well,
tell
it's
me more.
basically that there are times when the normal rules don't apply. You see, the way you've looked at the world is just not applicable because the world has changed. It's a revolutionary situation.
When has it been applicable in your life, and when has it been employed in your life?
Well, it was certainly had this experience with the Nazi regime, then the communist regime, the beginnings of the communist regime, and then actually I've kind of specialized on these far from equilibrium situations in the financial markets. That's been my specialty.
But explain more.
In other words, changes, you see, people generally play with a certain set of rules.
Right.
And I am particularly interested in changes in the rules of the game. And so I'm looking for the new game and the new rules, how they are played. So because I'm attuned to that, I can sort of sometimes anticipate or understand these periods of regime change when something really new is happening. Let's say anything to do with technology, let's say internet is something really revolutionary. It's something probably comparable to the invention of printing, and is happening currently. Now that changes a lot of things in technology stocks.
And was that the reason for the investors' enthusiasm for Netscape?
That's right. That's right. No, that may be, of course, an exuberance, but still, that is far from equilibrium. That's a revolutionary change.
That is just the internet, in your judgment, the World Wide Web, is as important as the printing press.
Yes, I think it will change, the way we do many things. Not just, I mean, the way we do research, the way we do our shopping, the way we communicate with people. It's more. To a large extent, I think it will replace television because it will replace the newspapers, because we'll probably get the information sort of collated for us.
Yes.
You know? So I mean, it's too difficult to anticipate.
But do you have a clear vision?
No, I don't have a clear vision. I just have a vision that there's some
You know that there's a moment of change.
I have a chaotic vision, not a clear vision.
You have a moment, but you know there's a moment of change here taking place because of the internet.
Yes.
Because it changes the way the world speaks to each other.
That's right.
The individuals in the world, and gives people the capacity to go around institutions that they have access to institutions in a different way. It sort of democratizes in a way.
Yeah, it will change many things. So that's one example. But I mean, you take, let's say, Europe, the integration and disintegration of Europe. Those are, what we talked about. It makes me bearish on the French market. So those are the changes that I look at.
Now, does that still mean you adhere to macro investing, or is it?
Oh yes, of course.
And that basically is looking at a series of forces that you think.
Yes.
Whatever the currency you're looking at, whether it's bonds or stocks or commodities or currency.
Right. Well, if it's a macroeconomic change, then you've got sort of macro instruments like bonds, or which allow you to play them.
Yeah. How have you changed after all of this money and all of this attention? I mean, what has it caused you to do with the way you live your life and choices you make for yourself?
Well, I think it empowered me in many ways. I mean, it has given me freedom, and it has also given me an ability to have much greater impact than otherwise. And of course, with that goes the responsibility. What kind of impact do you want to make, right? So it really makes you think. So I've become, let's say, a more effective person, but now I've become also a more reflective person, because my own life has changed, and I need to think things through again. And actually, the book is an attempt to do so.
But this is thinking out loud in terms of questions about who you are and the philosophy. You have suggested one role model for you was John Maynard Keynes, and both because he was an investor and a theoretician, because he had a Keynesian philosophy about the way the markets work.
Yeah, I mean, it's just sort of, I was asked, well, do you have any models? So, I mean,
I'm not suggesting you're comparing yourself to Keynes, but you look at someone who had a life and you say he was a philosopher.
I think that's a full life, you see, to actually to participate and to think, to interact. I mean, for me, thinking and understanding is the most important thing. But for many years in my youth, I was deeply involved in profound philosophical questions, and I went on over and over the same questions until I was really spinning my wheels. I wasn't getting anywhere. Then I entered the real world, and I moved forward, you see. My wheels grabbed on. And that has enabled me to bring my own thinking forward. So let's say the conceptual framework, which I outlined there, I formed it in my student days, but I've developed it a lot further. You see, so I think that I'm you know.
What did markets teach you about your philosophical framework?
Well, it was a laboratory where I could test my ideas. And
because it is a hard-headed, very realistic laboratory.
Yeah, it's a hard taskmaster.
Yes,
you see.
you know.
So there is such a thing as reality. Okay, there's one should realize, and funny thing to say that the market is reality, because it seems to be so far removed from reality. But that is actually a very good example of what reality is, because all the false ideas and misconceptions that we have and which play in the market, okay, is part of the reality that we have to think about. So the role of misconceptions is tremendously important in forming reality. You see, that
the reality of the market is infused by your recognition of all the misassumptions that go into it.
You see, one of the major misconceptions, which we sort of started with the Greek philosophers and then was reinforced by science, the success of science, is that our thinking is here and reality is there. And there's a correspondence between the two. You know, we try to understand what's out there. But in effect, our thinking is part of the reality that we are trying to understand. You see, so instead of thinking of sort of two parallel things, we have to realize that there is one big thing, which is reality. Okay, and there really is such a thing, and we are part of it. And being part of it, we can't possibly encompass it, understand it fully. And our conceptions about what that thing is, usually misconceptions, is part of it. So it's an evolving reality. It's a self-generating reality. The more we understand, the better we can cope with it, the more sophisticated our civilization becomes. The more complicated, the more there is to understand.
What do you think is the best? I want to come to the markets and how you feel about the fact that the markets are not perfect. Well, let me go to that first. You think the markets are not perfect?
Well, I think one of the misconceptions prevailing is that you know, there's such a thing, rational expectations, efficient markets, and so on. I think that basically markets, it's closer to the truth to say that markets are always wrong than to say that they're always right. Okay? They're not always wrong, but
it's closer to the truth. You also think there should be some regulation of markets, and while we have regulations from country to country to country, there is no regulation, in a sense, a global regulation.
No, well, see, what I put forward is that financial markets are inherently unstable. And to preserve stability, it has to be the objective of policy to introduce or to preserve stability. And in fact, we have the central banks whose job it is. We have the SEC that oversees the securities market. But we now have a global market, and we don't have global institutions. And we still need regulation. And we really have to do something.
But I should point out that the Quantum Fund is an offshore fund.
Yeah, well, I know what I'm speaking about.
I should tell you.
I don't mind regulation as long as it doesn't single out our fund. As long as it applies to everyone equally.
It's okay to regulate, but don't regulate offshore funds.
No, it's all right to regulate offshore funds as long as they are not singled out. You know, and particularly we are not singled out.
For reprimand or for punitive.
Right,
okay.
Right.
You would like to see some regulation of derivatives.
Yes. I think that clearly the instability in the yen showed that options can be very disruptive. They were very disruptive in the '87 crash. You know, that portfolio insurance was the use of a derivative. And it was recognized, and then so-called circuit breakers were introduced. So I think that there is a need to recognize that derivatives can be destabilizing because they bring about trend-following behavior, automatic trend-following behavior by the people who have sold the options. And when the market goes against them, they have to engage what is called dynamic hedging.
Yeah. Do you worry when you look at the Barron's Bank situation and the situation in Japan that there throughout the world that there are these rogue traders who can cover their mistakes without being detected for a period of time?
I don't think it's anything new. I think they've been around since the 18th century or even in antiquity.
So is new the volume? Is that what's new? The stakes, the money?
Even maybe the size of the defaults are, because the size of the institutions is different. I think we have always had those little mishaps, and we'll continue to have them. And we have a lot of regulations and internal controls, and it's only when they break down that you have these incidents.
You are, what, 60-something, right?
65.
65. What do you want to do with the rest of your life? What is it that you hope you can accomplish? Whether you live 30 years or 5.
Yeah, you know, since I'm a believer in an open society, I think this is an open-ended question. You see,
you may change tomorrow.
No, what I mean is that I really don't know. I mean, I have a sense of direction, how far I can go. Maybe this is it. Maybe I've just peaked right this minute.
Yeah, well, but I mean, but what's the opposite side of it? I mean, what is the open-ended is in terms of what you think? You don't know the answer in terms of how whatever influences you can bring to bear.
Yes, well, I really, you see, having engaged in a lot of action in the last 5 years, I'm now really entering a period of reflection. And I was focusing, let's say, on Eastern Europe. I now realize that there's something fundamentally flawed or missing in our open societies. There's
like what?
Well, there is a crisis of values and a lack of cohesion, a lack of a common purpose. And people are groping for it in different ways. And I see the need for it, but I don't know the answer. You see, I don't know. For instance, I see this tremendous need for a stable security system. Mm-hmm. I really think that we will have an awful lot of wars and
how about moral values? How about the notion of a sense of purpose?
Yes, that is very much part of
questions of liberty and freedom.
Yes, I mean the question is, you see, you live in an open society. It means that we live in a global society, multicultural. What is it that we really believe in? You know, we have our values, the Japanese have theirs. Singapore tells us that Asian values are different from American values. There has to be something, you see, that unites us, something that we stand for. And I have this rather difficult notion that what unites us is that there is the recognition that our understanding of the world in which we live is imperfect. And we have to have respect for each other's opinions. That there is a reality, but there is a pluralism of values. And that pluralism is a good thing. Now, therefore, pluralism has to be the common value.
Right.
Now, how to get there? You see, we have it enshrined in our Constitution, freedom and so on. But it doesn't apply on a global scale. It only applies to our country. And it's said these things we hold self-evident. Well, it isn't self-evident. We somehow have to come to this conclusion, you see, that freedom is worth preserving, that it needs to be preserved, that it won't survive without our willingness to fight for it, to make some sacrifices for it. So there has to be, let's say, a common ground for which we are willing to stand.
To stand for. Soros on Soros, Staying Ahead of the Curve, is a conversation between George Soros and Byron Wien of Morgan Stanley. I thank you, in which it talks about philosophy and business and politics. Thank you for joining us for this time. It's been a pleasure to have you here again. We thank you for joining us. Look forward to seeing you next time. See you then.